Mario Kart World races are always full of chaos, which is largely because the items in this game are quite crazy and playing aggressively is rewarded more than in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So today I'm going to be ranking each item in the game based on how fun I find them to use and play against, and just how well I think they've been implemented into the game in general. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy, and let me know how your rankings would differ from mine in the comments. Starting off at number 28, the worst item in the game is the Blooper. I reckon quite a lot of you watching didn't even realise that the Blooper is in the game, because to me it feels like you nearly never get hit by one, and I genuinely think I've only pulled the Blooper about 3 or 4 times since the game came out. Even if it was more common, the Blooper would still be incredibly pointless, as it makes nearly zero impact on anyone's race other than wasting an item box for whoever pulled it. It might not be an item that makes the game inherently worse, but when you think about some of the other items that have been left out of the game, it makes you wonder why on earth it takes a spot on the item roster. In 27th, I've put the Boomerang Flower. Now, I actually didn't mind this item in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but it has gotten significantly worse in this game, because the changes made to it encourage the player to spam it as quickly as possible, even more than before. For example, in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, if you threw a boomerang whilst having an item in the second slot, that one would move to the first slot, letting you use it after only one boomerang throw. Also, if you did this when going into an item set, the boomerang would then be replaced by the new item. However, in this game, the boomerang stays in your first slot until you have completely used it, which is now 4 throws if you're doing it as quickly as possible. This means that if you have a great item in the second slot, 4 possibly mindless boomerang throws could take place before you can use it, which is just more annoying for both the boomerang user and the players around them. Oh yeah, by the way, I don't quite understand the benefit of having a maximum of 4 throws over 3 either, as it just makes the item even easier to hit people with, which is already a problem in itself for the item in general, and the timer makes it so you can only get all 4 throws if you spam it as quickly as you can, adding to the problem. Also, I think the boomerang is slightly too common. It feels like you can always expect 1 or 2 people to have a boomerang when you're in the middle of the pack, which can get annoying because they are quite difficult to defend against. To be fair, it can at least be fun to use if you don't need to rush to get rid of it, but I think it is one of, if not the least enjoyable to have to play against, putting it very low on the list. In 26th place, I've put the coin block. Now, the big problem I have with this item is the fact that you can pull it in spots like 7th to 9th in a 12-player room, because it is useless when you're trying to catch up and just not fun to use at all. I normally quite like items that aren't really powerful being in the item roulette in these kind of spots, because being guaranteed a broken item just makes the game less strategic. However, I don't think the coin block is an item that suits that purpose well at all, because it just isn't very exciting and doesn't add any jeopardy to the race. Items like the power block and the thundercloud actually have an impact, but the coin block just gives you and people behind you a bunch of coins, which is very dull. It can be helpful early on in the race to get your coin count up when playing from the back, but I think it is better suited as the alternative to the coin item in other top spots like 2nd to 5th to guarantee that loads of people can be fighting for coins at once. But to be honest, I think the game wouldn't be any worse if this item didn't exist at all. In 25th is the dash food. This item isn't even necessarily bad, it just doesn't get used in regular races much at all. Most of the regular tracks don't even have a dash food bag available to grab, which is a shame because it could be quite cool in some races. Of course, being able to use the dash food to unlock costumes is cool, but I only really care about the item's practicality in races, which is very little. It can't even be used to dodge a blue shell, which would have at least made it a good item to go for when in first. I think it is very much wasted potential, especially when you think back to how much speculation there was about it when we saw it in the trailer. In 24th and 23rd, I have the Ice Flower and Fire Flower. These 2 items are practically the same, so I've bunched them together. You can hardly notice the difference when you get hit by either of them. I've put the Ice Flower below the Fire Flower because it's a new item that didn't need to be introduced at all. I do think that these items are slightly better than the Fire Flower in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, just because you get less throws in this game, and I think it's easier to avoid, which makes it a bit more bearable. But they haven't improved enough to get any higher on the list, mainly due to how spammy and random they are. In 22nd, I have triple red shells. This item is way too common. It feels like you interact with triple reds 4 or 5 times per race on average, which is just ridiculous in my opinion. Triple reds should be a somewhat rare item to pull since they are so powerful, but in this game you can kind of expect to pull them half the time when you're in the middle spots. And what doesn't help the triple reds is the fact that I have the single red shell in 21st, because I think even red shells on their own are too overpowered. In this game, red shells catch up to you insanely quickly, making them really hard to react to, especially if they're thrown directly behind you. I don't mind it being harder than in other games, but I do think it is a little bit too much. You hardly get any warning before they hit you. Next, I have the coin item in 20th. Not too much to say about this one. I think it's a fine item to have when there are double item boxes, but I think their value in first should have been doubled alongside the maximum coin count to 4 coins instead of 2. After that, in 19th, I have the blue shell. Of course, the blue shell is a good item to have in Mario Kart, but I have a couple of problems with it here. First, I think it can be too punishing for first place, to the point where it is more often than not worth it to just drive off the track instead and get a fast respawn. Secondly, say, when you're close to first place, I find it almost impossible to predict the path the blue shell will take when it locks on, which is just not fun to deal with when you have to plan to stay out of the way of the explosion. I don't really know if I prefer the blue shell riding along the ground at all in this game, to be honest. I think it does make it slightly better for the player who pulls it, as they can hit multiple people with it at times, but since the coin shell also does this, I think it might be better if the blue shell went back to being in the air to limit the danger of being in the middle of the road. Next up in 18th, I've put the green shell. This item is just fine, works as well as normal, but just naturally isn't in the top half of the items in this game because it isn't extravagant in any way. It just does its job. This logic also applies to the banana in 17th, but I actually think it is better than in previous games because it's more reliable as a trap item, partly due to having a slightly bigger hitbox and partly because of it being generally harder to change direction when drifting in this game. Now in 16th we have the hammer. To be honest, this item could move around a lot in the future because I don't really know where I stand with it. I think it's quite a cool item to use, and it can be quite tricky if you are aiming for a specific player in front or behind you, but if there are multiple people to aim for, then you can kind of just spam it and almost guarantee a couple hits, especially since they stay on the ground as a trap after they land. I do like that they can't be used to defend against other items though, as that creates a bit of balance, and I can see myself liking this item even more in the future, but for now I'm putting it close to the middle of the list. In 15th, I've put the coin shell. This item is just a coin block, but a lot better, as it is a non-power item that can still be pulled near the back of the pack, but it at least causes problems for the players in front of whoever threw it, and can affect players' decision making when driving the tracks over whether to go for their extra coins or just to drive as quickly as possible. Initially, when I started playing this game, I did not like that you could pull it in 9th in a 12-player room, but now I've changed my mind. I think it's a good way to balance out item reliance of the bottom spots while still being useful in situations. Like the hammer, this item also might end up being higher in the list as the game gets older. Now getting into the top half of the list, in 14th I've put the bomb. In Mario Kart World, the bomb has been nerfed quite a bit, as it doesn't explode as easily when it lands near someone, and you also can't throw it that far. I've actually grown to like the fact that it doesn't explode as easily though, especially when you're behind someone that backs a bomb, because in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe it was a little too easy to hit someone in that way. However, I think the fun of bomb snipes has been reduced too much for me to prefer the bomb in this game, because you can't try as many spectacular throws as you could before due to the reduced distance you get. Still a pretty decent item though. In 13th I've put the star. For some reason this item just feels nowhere near as powerful or fun to use in this game as it has been in previous games. Maybe it's because the mushrooms in this game have been buffed, so shortcuts feel underwhelming to take with the star. Maybe it's because it feels like you don't speed up that much from it. I don't know, but it just isn't as good in this game. It still gets a spot in the top half just because it's the star, but the other power items are just more fun to use in this game for me. In 12th place we have the boo. Now this item has gone through quite a change in this game, which is that you can now drive through off-road like it is normal road, which makes it much more useful even when you steal a bad item. Now in theory this change is quite nice, but there is one big problem that makes it kind of broken. You can pull it in the top spots and it isn't even uncommon. This makes it so you can pull a dodge item in the front pretty easily, which is quite unbalanced. Also, there can now be two ghosts in play at once, which makes getting your item stolen at an inconvenient time more likely, which isn't ideal. One thing that makes it a bit more fair is that your invincibility lasts for less time than other dodge items, which helps make the boo in this game better than in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for balance. In 11th place I've put triple bananas, then in 10th I've put triple green shells. These items are this high up because they actually protect you, which is a very nice improvement compared to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I know I placed the single versions of these items the other way around earlier in the list, but I prefer triple greens over bananas simply because I find it more fun to be able to throw green shells in both directions when in the pack than bananas. Although I think the functionality of bananas trapping grind rails is better than with green shells, so these two can easily swap places if you like, but who really cares? Now in 9th I've put the super horn. Of course this item is great, so it automatically gets a high spot. Being able to pull an item in first to dodge the blue shell is class. However, this item is slightly worse than in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe because chaining it into an item set is annoying to do. You have to make sure that the horn blast ends before you hit the item box, which is just an unnecessary change in my opinion. It also feels like this item is more commonly pulled in spots behind first than it used to be. I feel like I've seen multiple horns be pulled at the same time more often, which I'm not a fan of. Despite that though, this is still a great item. In the 8th spot I've put the single mushroom. Mushrooms in this game are great. The single mushroom does its job as it should. Carrying it into first to dodge a blue shell is nice as always, and I also don't mind the addition of it being trailed and giving someone who touches it a boost. In 7th I've put the feather. Now I think this has been the most polarizing item of them all, but I have to say that I am very much a fan of this item. The concept of having shortcuts that are made specifically for the feather is so fun, and I think it has been executed really well on a lot of tracks. And since the game is still so new, there will definitely be more shortcuts found with the feather that make it even better, which will be exciting to see. I do think that the feather is made slightly worse by the red shells being so hard to react to, because it makes jumping over them in time harder than it should be, but I think you can get used to it with a bit of practice. There can also be times where pulling a feather is quite useless, which does stop it from being higher on the list for now, but to be honest I think the shortcut potential of this item could move it further up the list for me in the future. In 6th I've put the bullet bill. Of course the bullet bill had to be placed high up on the list, it's a great item in general. There are a couple changes made to it though that are interesting. Firstly, if you get hit by a bullet then you don't actually spin out, you instead get bumped away from it and your drift gets cancelled. I actually don't like this change, one because I find it more annoying to get redirected by the bullet bill when in a drift, and 2 because it feels less rewarding to hit people with without seeing them spin out. However, I do think the bullet bills are a bit smarter in this game, at least when it comes to not dropping you off in awkward positions, which is nice. Also, there was a bit of worry before the game came out around the bullet bill not lasting long enough, but after playing the game, as far as I can tell, it isn't actually the case, or at least isn't a noticeable problem. Overall, I think I prefer the bullet bill in previous games, but it is still good enough to stay near the top of the list here. Now we get into the top 5, where I firstly placed triple mushrooms. Like the single mushroom, this item does its job well. It's great to pull in most situations, I don't really have any complaints. There are just some other items that have gone through big improvements that earn them higher spots in the list. An example of one of these items is the golden mushroom, which gets the 4th place spot. It is so much more fun to use the golden in this game than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, as it just feels like you're going way faster when you're using it. I don't really know why that is the case either, as the speed gain you get is practically the same as before. Maybe it's down to items like the star being less effective, maybe it's to do with the regular driving being slower in this game, I don't know, but whatever it is, I'm not complaining. It actually makes you happy to pull the golden mushroom in this game in a lot of situations, which often wasn't the case in the past. Now for the top 3 items, where we have the mega mushroom in 3rd. This and the golden mushroom are quite interchangeable, but I just find the mega slightly more fun to use. It increases your speed whilst being great protection against nearly every item in the game, and you can move around the track trying to flatten people if you feel like being a menace. I do like that you can't hold another item whilst in the mega mushroom in this game, as I think being able to use a mega mushroom and a golden mushroom at the same time would have been too broken. I am unsure whether I like the fact that you don't shrink back down to normal when hit by a shock, as I thought that was quite a cool mechanic in Mario Kart Wii. But it does make taking shortcuts less risky, which is pretty nice. Speaking of the shock, that is the item in 2nd place. Of course, this item is the strongest in the game to pull, but that isn't the reason I put it this high. Instead, it's because I'm quite a big fan of the changes that have been made to it in this game. If you don't already know, in Mario Kart World, the user of the shock will only hit people in front of them, so even if a player behind them is not in a dodge item, they will not get hit by it. And since you also can't see if a player has the shock in their first item slot, playing around the shock has become even more tactical, as you can now choose to slow down to get behind someone if you think they have the shock. And of course, the shock user has to keep in mind the number of players who are behind them before they hit the trigger. Also, I think the amount of time you are small being nearly equal for everyone is a great change, as it means that the front spots aren't at a significant disadvantage once they've been struck, which allows for front running to be a more viable strategy in general, which I entirely prefer. Another fairly important change is that there can only be one shock pulled every 30 seconds, but there can still be multiple shocks in play at the same time if someone holds onto a shock for too long. This makes the shock more valuable to get, kind of like in Mario Kart Wii, but there is still a risk of someone else using it if you wait too long. Again, I like this change. It has a nice balance between the Mario Kart Wii and the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe shock mechanics. However, all these nice changes aren't quite enough to earn the number 1 spot on my list. Instead, that goes to my favourite item in the game, the Kamik Orb. I think this item is actually so interesting because it adds chaos to the race while still being tactical. One of my favourite items in Mario Kart Wii is the power block, because it can be used tactically to target other players in front of you, while still giving those players time to react and adapt before it could completely mess them up. I was hoping it would make a return in Mario Kart World, but instead we got an even better item that serves a similar purpose. When you use the Kamik Orb, Kamik flies ahead of you for all players to see. This gives people an alert that they are about to transform into an enemy character, which then cancels their drift or charge jump, which is pretty much what the power block would have done, but now there is the addition of random enemies being spawned on the track as obstacles. I love this added chaos to the races. There are so many different enemies that can spawn on the track, so you have to be immediately prepared to evade them all, which is doable but not easy a lot of the time, especially if it's one of the more powerful enemies like the bob-ombs or the spike balls. Of course, this is also the way you unlock the enemy characters in this game, which is a cool feature but didn't really matter to me when it came to placing this item at the top of the list. I just really enjoy having another item that affects everyone in front of the user that gives people a warning before it takes effect, isn't too punishing if you react to it, while still having potential to gain the user some positions if they can use it effectively. Each track having specific enemies that can spawn could add more strategy in the future as well, since people may figure out which enemies can cause the most damage in certain spots of the tracks. With there being so many different possible enemies spawning, it is natural that some are more impactful than others, but I think if every single enemy were useless, or if they were all incredibly powerful, then the item would be a bit less exciting. So I like having different levels of danger being added to the racetrack each time the item is used. It gives the item even more more variety and chaos than it already has. So yeah, overall the Kamik Orb is my favourite item in the game and my favourite new item Nintendo has introduced for quite a long time. And that concludes my ranking. Be sure to leave a comment, which items do you agree with and which ones have I got horribly wrong. Of course these rankings will constantly change as the game goes on, so I could end up disagreeing with this whole thing by tomorrow. Thanks for watching.